Fabulous. Okay, so hi, I'm Martha Pusey and I'm Director of Eye Care, and today I'm with Joanna and Jackie, and they're going to talk to us about guilt and grief from a carer's perspective. So Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Jackie and I was the carer for my mum after she developed dementia for 5 years until she died.
Thank you. And hi, Joanne.
Hiya. So I'm Joanna and my mum had dementia for 7 years. She passed away in May this year. So although I wasn't living with mum, I was certainly her carer and kind of the main person responsible for everything that happened with her, really, and for organising her care, I suppose, is the phrase to use.
So we're going to be talking today about guilt and grief, and we've already been having a very lengthy discussion about this, and there's some real kind of key things that we know that kind of come out of the guilt for carers when they're looking after a loved one, whether that's at home or if they're having to put somebody into a care home, but also that feeling of grief. So, you know, not realizing that you're in that caring role, and then when that role is taken away from you, the grieving process that you're going through can be quite profound. So Joanne, just tell us about your story and just tell us about your experiences.
Yeah, so mum was in a supported living flat. I was really lucky to be able to get her in there, actually, because it was a beautiful complex and it was half a mile away from where I lived. And the main reason for that is because where she lived before, she lived on her own, and the flat that she lived in was quite dangerous in terms of like stairs and concrete steps to get to the front door. And mum had started to struggle with her mobility. She's having some falls. So this lovely complex that she was in, she stayed there for, I think it was 5 years. And throughout that time, her care needs started to escalate. So when she first went in, she didn't need carers at all. And then probably a year into that, she needed somebody to help her do her washing and to kind of take her shopping because she couldn't go outside on her own safely. And that was kind of in between me supporting her. So I was a police officer at the time, and it was lucky that the way my shift pattern works, I would get 3 or 4 days off in a row. And if those days were during the week, then that was brilliant for mum and for me, because I could take her to her appointments while the kids were at school, take her out because she couldn't go out on her own. And then we sort of escalated to the level where she wasn't safe there anymore. And she had quite a sort of lengthy stint, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks in hospital. And the supported living, the care system there, they just decided that they couldn't care for her safely anymore, which I agreed with. But mum had always said, don't put me in a care home. She never wanted to go into a care home. And I believe that one of the main reasons for that is because she worked with dementia patients. So mum was a mental health nurse for 25 years for the NHS. And during that time, she obviously had a lot of experience of dealing with dementia and the sort of the care system, if you like. And she was just petrified of it. That was the one thing that she used to say, you know, don't send me to a home. So when the decision came where she would go, that was the first bit of guilt, I suppose, in terms of I'm going against my mum's wishes. And everything that she was going through physically and mentally, that was traumatic enough to be losing her from that sort of perspective, but then to have her in a nursing home and know that it was something that she never wanted and I never wanted. So mum was placed in a 6-week placement in a home that's probably about 35 minutes away from where I live. And the whole kind of transfer was probably the most horrific thing that we'd ever been through as a family, because mum hated it. She absolutely hated it. And I wasn't given any sort of introduction to that. So I think it's one of them things, isn't it? When you're used to working somewhere and you understand the system, and I think the health system is guilty of this all the time, that you think people that you're dealing with have the same knowledge of everything that you do. But I'd never been in a nursing home. I'd never had a relative in a nursing home. I didn't know what the protocol was. I didn't know what she needed, what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to continue to support her. And actually, I said this to you earlier, didn't I, when we were chatting, the first day that I went to visit her, I was just told it's open visiting, you can go whenever. I had no contact from anybody at the care home to tell me what any of the procedures were for that. So I just went and kind of rung the bell, and a carer came and saw me to her room. And she was in a bed with cot sides, and she was hysterical. She was screaming, I'm stuck in a box, get me out of this box. And she was more verbal that day than I'd seen her for a long time. And so I suppose you could say that was the start of this, what you said earlier, Martha, about that kind of moving away from me being her carer and sorting everything out for her, to me having to hand over that responsibility to people that I didn't know. I had no trust in those people because I hadn't built up a relationship. There was no rapport with those people. And I didn't understand the system, so I didn't know what they would do, how well they'd care for her. And my first initial reaction when I saw her on that first day was, well, this is not going to go well, because they've just left her screaming in a room on her own. There's nobody with her. And how I've got to leave, I can't sleep here because I've got work in the morning. I've got to leave her like that. And that sort of, after a little while of getting upset and thinking I can't let her see me cry, I stood outside. So I stood outside her room, and a nurse came past with a drugs trolley, and she sort of stopped and said to me, you know, it will get easier, she will get used to it. And that was it. That was my introduction into the care system. And it just took probably 3 months, I think, of visits before she was finally sort of, I wouldn't say settled, because she was never happy, but before she calmed down, I think is the best way. Not entirely sure that was due to her feeling better being there, more due to the medication that she was given to calm her down, really. So yeah, the whole kind of letting go of being the main person that looked after my mom was quite difficult. And I just wanted some reassurance. And I found myself having to go and find that reassurance rather than somebody putting their arm around me and giving me that reassurance. And it is just about communication, because Mom was there for 3 years. And as those years went on and things happened, I built up a relationship with some of the staff, and I felt like that, you know, I could trust them, and that Mom was getting, you know, the care that she needed. I just want to add, there was nothing wrong with the care in terms of there was no neglect. Mom was never poorly. And in fact, health-wise, her health improved significantly while she was there, because she'd been getting water infections, constipated, falls, you know, she bruises everywhere, all that kind of stuff. And as soon as she went there and she got the care that she needed, none of that happened anymore. But I came away with awful bruises mentally, if that makes sense.
And I think as a care professional, I think having that understanding and empathy for a carer is so important. I think it's so easy to forget that the carer is a human being, that they've got feelings, and that, you know, they have been that person's rock, their everything. They've provided their care, you know, they've taken them to appointments, they've done everything. And all of a sudden, a care professional swoops in and says, okay, that's not your job anymore. So to just have somebody just to, I don't know, maybe just to sit and explain and to say, you know, you're going to feel like this, or you might feel like this, or you might feel like this, and that's okay. And we're here. And if you want to talk to us, then come and talk to us. And certainly I know in my work, I'll ask somebody twice, you know, are you okay? Yes. But are you okay? Because we know that our carers more often than not aren't okay, but it's like they need that permission to say they're not okay. And I think, recognizing the grief that somebody will be going through, it's massive, absolutely massive. And for somebody to just stop and take the time and recognize that just helps the carer understand the process, as you were saying, Joanna, that process a whole lot more. So Jackie, do you want to tell us about your experience of caring for your mum?
Yeah, so my mum was a very young widow, so she'd spent all of her life on her own, and I'm an only child. So our relationship, mother and daughter relationship, has always been quite close, feisty, but close. And there'd been the mother-daughter relationship had always been where if my mum needed something, I would make sure she had it. And at the point where she was behaving slightly differently, phone calls were different, I realized something wasn't quite right. And I actually stopped working, because I was working in the Midlands at the time and moved back down southeast to be close to her. So this is a very gradual thing as well. I found that the guilt I was experiencing when my mum was alive was more about her disappointment, in the sense of things that were happening to her and she didn't like it, like carers coming into the house in order to make sure that she was taking a medication, having her drinks on. She was anti that, but disappointed in me, and then I felt guilty. So not suggesting, well, it shouldn't be carers doing it, it should be my daughter doing it. Might have been a bit of that in there maybe, but that wasn't really it. It was more about the fact that you put strangers in my home is kind of where it started from. And she was very verbal about it. She's born East End London, and fought through the war in terms of, she was a child, and there were lots of things that she saw that luckily none of us will see, but that kind of feistiness stayed with her. So as far as she was concerned, people don't come in your home unless you invite them. And of course I had to put key safe, keys, blah, blah, all of that stuff, all new to me, and obviously very new to her. So this constant conversation with her about why that had to happen, whilst sometimes she accepted it, sometimes she didn't. That's where my guilt really began, I think, to grow. I felt I was already letting her down. Why wasn't I there to do that? That kind of thing. But I think also as things changed, and they do change in such a, they say that dementia is progressive, and it is, but everything else is progressive with it, I found. So for example, the first time that she didn't recognize me because she thought I was a carer. So by then she was in the routine of having carers, and I was with her one afternoon and just made her a cup of tea, and somehow or another, the way she looked at me, and she said, "Oh, you're new." And then I said, "Well, I'm your daughter." So there are milestones in there as well where I felt quite upset by that. But I think for me, where the grief began there, but where it really escalated with the guilt, was when I couldn't fulfill the promises that I'd made to her. And I think that carers do it all the time. It was interesting, Joanna, in your introduction when you said that whilst you didn't have your mum living with you, you were organised. So I would say now you were a full-time carer doing those things. And I think I was a full-time carer doing those things. But when you're in it and you're doing it, you think, and I know when someone asked me, "Do you care for your mum?" "Oh, no, I've got carers that go into my mum's." But actually they were only there because I'd organised it, as I say, and she had a very limited personal budget to spend on care, so I pumped it all in Monday to Friday so I could work, and then I'd spend the weekend. So we don't see ourselves as carers, we see ourselves as doing the best for the person we love. And then what came along with that was that constant feeling of letting her down, not getting it right, not really understanding the system at all, but also feeling quite lonely, because I thought that what I was experiencing with my mum in terms of lack of support, lack of understanding, constantly new faces of carers coming in, was just happening to us. And now I realise, because I then changed careers after my mum died, moved into working in the social care sector, I realised that it's much more common than that. And I think that my feeling of guilt was around my mum's death. She had 3 weeks in hospital, and it was all the things that I promised her wouldn't happen to her. I'm much more, I've come to terms with that now, but I still do have occasions when I feel like I let her down. But sense then comes in, and I realised that actually there was nothing I could do to change it. God knows I tried in all sorts of ways of verbalising my concerns. But in the end, I think that where I got to was I actually wanted her to go. It was just horrendous. But then I felt guilty about that. So you just carry on, and this deal you do with yourself all the time of, let's just get her to that stage. If I can get there to that stage and then she dies, I'll be happy. Or let's get it to that stage or that stage. And they're all unrealistic deals you make with yourself. And I think that the guilt is something that isn't spoken about enough. Not just when the person's died, but when you're actually in it with them and feeling guilty and feeling that you're failing. I think that's where it comes from for me.
I think there's a tremendous amount of powerlessness as carers that you have, that, you know, you can't control a social care system. You can't control what happens on a day-to-day basis. You can't control the carers that come and go or don't if they're off sick, or where somebody's placed. You know, there's so much that you can't control, but at the same time you feel you need to control, because that's your loved one and you know them best and you know what's going to work for them. But I think, and at the same time with that, there's the whole, people aren't listening to you as carers. They don't hear what's really important for you, and they don't hear how you know that perhaps, Jackie, your mum might have behaved or said something, well, that means this, and if she says that, then you do this. If people aren't listening and aren't hearing that, as care professionals, we're not hearing that, it can become so much harder for the person with dementia, but also for the carer, the frustrations that must build up from that, just phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that was when my mum was admitted to hospital and she was completely off the scale. She was talking 100 miles an hour. She was animated, she was stimulated, but all in a negative way, trying to kind of, from what I could see, make sense of where she was, what environment she was in. And the way she did that was that she convinced herself and then convinced me that she was back in the factory, she was working. And I spoke to a nurse and actually said, it would be good for one of you to say, right, shift has ended, Elsie, you know, time for dinner or whatever. She will respond to that. And they just looked at me as if, well, I don't know, you know, what a ridiculous thing. Of course we won't say that. And I think the issue here is around bespoke care, maybe. And Joanna, I know, as you say, that your mum had the best of care and it was that initial stage. I feel that people aren't considered about the rich lives they've led, and even though they are where they are, what shaped them to be who they are, because that, I think, now is far more relevant when people have dementia, and really digging into their lives really helps them and reassures them. And if I'd heard somebody speaking to my mum like that, it would have really made me feel like, oh, great, they've got it. And my mum would have responded well. Mm. So the guilt then also comes back to, for me, did I not explain that properly? How could I have said it differently to the nurse to get them to talk to her in that way? And of course, the issue is, like you say, the damage it does to you and your own mental health. I took a year out after my mum died and just travelled. I let my passport expire while she was alive because I knew there was no way I was ever going to go anywhere. And it was an interesting year for me. I cried a lot, but I also did quite a lot of things that my mum would have liked me to have done. That helped to heal it a bit as well.
And so, Joanna, from your experience, you decided to go and set up For the Love of Me. So tell us a bit about that and how you're helping people from your experience.
Yeah, so I think I did mention to you earlier off camera that I'd had a couple of periods where I ended up being off work. I describe it as my meltdowns, which I can smile about now when I look back. But at the time, I was physically and mentally exhausted, and just couldn't function anymore. So that kind of juggling a full-time job, the children, husband, home, and mom, and you know, even this was even when mom was in a home. It's not as if I had to physically go and do things to support her like I did before. Incidentally, I have no idea how I actually got through that time of my life. How did I, I must have been getting energy from somewhere.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Yeah. And then you just crash and burn. And I think that's what happened to me. So I spoke to our local hospice, and they gave me some bereavement kind of talking therapy. And the lady there was wonderful, and she helped me to understand that what I was experiencing was anticipatory grief.
Yes.
But actually, what I was experiencing was just grief. I've learnt that now. It's grief all the way through all of these different stages, right from diagnosis, right from the changes in behaviour, the mom not being the person that she was for me before. So I couldn't go to her and ask her for her advice anymore. I was grieving that because she'd always been the one that I'd pick up the phone and go, oh, I had a crap day at work today, blah, blah, blah. And then she'd, or actually more appropriately, because mom was a nurse, if ever anything was wrong with me, I would speak to the doctor and then I'd phone my mom, and she'd say, oh, and did he tell you to take an anti-inflammatory, because that will help, that kind of thing. And so it's that grieving process all the way through. But actually what I was doing to myself was also driving myself to distraction with what's next. Okay, and the emotional sort of upheaval of what I'd gone through was bad, but what I was thinking was coming was worse. And I felt actually quite desperate to know. And one of the first questions that I asked my Admiral nurse was, how long have I got left? It became almost a sort of obsession, because I didn't think that I could deal with what was coming. So that talking therapy was great. However, it's not bespoke to dementia. It's not she was great at what she did, but she'd never been through what I was going through, if that makes sense. So there's a couple of different parts to For the Love of Me, and the name that I've chosen for it is all about, I went through all of that, and it was always about my mom, which quite rightly it should have been, because she was the one that was going through that dementia journey. But I was also going through that. And so it's a combination of that kind of, when you're like, for the love of God kind of thing. It's like, what about me? For the love of me, who's looking after me so that I can look after that person? So there's a couple of things that I did. One of them is to kind of set up a Facebook group of people that are going through that can share experiences, because even talking now is therapy when I'm talking to you guys about what happened. And that's really important for people. And I didn't feel like I had that connection throughout that 7 years. I didn't have people that I could go to. So For the Love of Me is to create that community, to just talk to other people that are going through that. But the other part of that is that I trained to become a grief coach, quite sort of specific to dementia. So it's not necessarily that, you need counselling because your loved one's going through dementia. But no, it's just the time and the space for somebody that you trust to just talk about how you're feeling. Because if you don't, that cup gets fuller and fuller and fuller, and then you end up off work for 3 months like I did. So that's it really. It's the emotional side of it for us as carers, to have somebody that's been through that experience and to understand what you're going through, but also not to say you should do this, you should do that, because that doesn't work. It's just to talk about your emotions and how you feel, and kind of make people feel less alone, And I know that that's something that we've said today, isn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of lonely feeling, because you do feel like you're the only one going through that. And then it's only when you meet someone else like Jackie, if we'd have met a couple of years ago, I would have been like, wow, I've got so many questions to ask you. Did this happen to you? And did that happen to you? And so I wanted to create that kind of community for people like me that have been through that, because it isn't there.
Yeah, no, it's not there, and it needs to be.
I agree. And I think there's something else about it as well, which is that I've met carers since my mum's died, actually, because I'm in a different sector of work now. And there's something else about it, which is shame. In other words, I need to present myself. I don't mean me, but I meet people who kind of give you the persona of, I need to present myself as a giving carer, caring for my husband, wife, mum, dad. I don't want anyone to know that actually I'm irritable, I'm sleep deprived, I'm getting it wrong, I'm getting cross with him/her, because if anybody knows that, I'll be the only carer in the world that's like that, because everybody else is amazing. And that is the thing for me, in the sense of, if I can burst that one and I can say to people, I actually don't know anyone who was totally patient, never lost their rag, never, said, well, of course, I've already told you that 3 times, or whatever it happens to be. It's just not possible. I just don't believe those people exist. Or if they do, they're fibbing. And I want carers to know that now, that it's all right. And I want them to be able to either say, like, maybe within your group or within a group, to be able to say, God, I really lost it this morning. Because what comes after losing it is a wave, or a tsunami of guilt. So when you calm down and you're making a cup of tea for that person or sorting something out, that's when it really comes rolling in, and you feel bad about yourself, you feel like you're a horrible person, and it's so damaging. So if we can burst that bit, I think there's some, that is some progress, really.
And so just to finish then, as carers, can you both give me your top tip for what you really think professionals need to understand about the caring role and the guilt and the grief that somebody's going through?
Just listen to that person's life story. Listen to the person who knows them the best, saying, these are the things they've done through their lives, and I want you to acknowledge that within their care, would be.
Lovely. Thanks, Jackie. Joanna?
I think it's to include the carer in the care package. So my experience was that kind of having a meeting, sitting down with the nurse and the social worker at the time, and we'd kind of go through, where mum was with her mobility and medication, all that kind of thing. But that's just like a scheduled meeting, and it's almost like that's a ticky box. So we've done that now with that person, and then we'll just leave it and we'll just carry on. And actually you want to be included all the time, and that makes it quite difficult, because I felt constantly as if I was asking for that. And I noted, and I've just made a quick note when you were talking earlier, Martha, about carers and care staff not listening. But actually I just want to add on to that, they need to ask. They need to ask, because sometimes you feel like you're a bit of a pain in the backside, that you're, oh, it's her again, she's having a moan because we didn't do whatever. And actually, if you'd have just asked, then you would have got the answer that you needed. And I think the other thing definitely is something that you mentioned earlier, Jackie, about different carers coming in and your mum seeing different faces. I think there needs to be that kind of, if you're new to an area, you've just started work there, it is your responsibility to get to know those people that you're caring for. Not, it's not going to come flying down from the ceiling and go into your brain. You need to go and get that person's file out and find out who are they, because actually it's going to make your job easier. Like for my mom, if somebody was to just say to her, oh, you're Welsh, aren't you? I went to Wales on holiday. Where did you live? taking care of my mum's personal care would not have involved screaming, kicking, biting, and all the rest of it if they'd have just bothered to talk to her first.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Or even that with my mum, because she was Cockney through and through, you know, even if it was, oh, I've never been to London, what was it like living there? Because you would have got, she would have started on a conversation and you would have been there for another half an hour, but she would have been animated and would have agreed probably to things that actually, instead, she told people to not politely leave.
Same.
Fabulous. Well, I think definitely as a care professional, my takeaway from that is listen, ask, and see me. So, you know, we need to listen to our carers. We need to ask them questions, and we need to see them as human beings as well, with feelings as well. So I hope everybody watching us found this helpful. I know certainly from the conversations we've been having already before off camera, it's, I think, quite cathartic to talk about our experiences, and really good for our mental health. And watch out, because I'm sure we'll be having some more videos coming your way soon. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's good to meet you, Joanna.
Thank you. And you.
Thank you.